Did Halloween really begin as a Celtic festival to the dead? Or is it all just a myth? Dig deep into ancient rituals, uncover surprising archaeological finds, and reveal what's fact and fiction about Samhain's link to the year's spookiest holiday. This is The Resurrectionists. Hello everyone, and welcome to the final episode of Season 1 of The Resurrectionists podcast. And oh boy, let me tell you, has this week been a week. I am so glad this podcast is ending this week. Nothing to do with the podcast, more just to do with my life and what's been happening recently. So I am just a little background onto why I'm so relieved about this. I got a call at 9 o'clock on Monday morning while I was at work to be like, "Hey Megan, can you come out to site in Dublin either tomorrow or the day after for an indeterminate amount of time and do manual labor?" So yeah, I got called out on site. So now I have to travel an hour and a half every morning to go dig holes for 7.5 hours a day and then travel an hour and a half back home. It's been fun. It's also been incredibly tiring, so I didn't have any time to research this week's episode during the week. I'd normally do a little bit of research in the evenings and then put everything together on a Saturday and then record and edit and do all of that on a Sunday. But I just could not do that this week. I was getting home so much later than normal and so much more tired than normal. Also, I didn't have an episode topic really in mind for this week, and when I did start researching one of them on Saturday, I realized that it was a lot more political and probably definitely racially charged a lot. I still want to do that episode. I'm definitely going to do it next season maybe, but I think it just needs a lot more time dedicated to it to do it justice and to be respectful. So yeah, I ended up having to pivot away from that into this week's topic, which is on theme for the holiday. So that's great. I thought it would be short and easy, okay, just get this out of the way. It's on theme. It works. Nope. There was also problems with this one, but I had committed at that point and it was too late to turn back. So this week we're going to be discussing Samhain and the possible connections between it and the modern day holiday of Halloween. And yes, for anyone wondering out there, I know a vast majority of my audience is American, and usually I don't mind when people who are not Irish mispronounce Irish words because our spellings are weird. Trust me, my dyslexic brain knows better than anyone how weird our spellings for words are, and I don't judge anyone when they mispronounce things, except for Samhain, because it is completely unrecognizable the way a lot of Americans seem to pronounce it. I've heard it pronounced Samhain by Americans, and I'm like, I'm sorry, but that's two separate words. Those are two words, and that's a name. That's a person's name. That's not, I get where you got that from, but it's just so wrong and so unrecognizable that I don't think it was until I was watching an episode of Supernatural with captions on that I realized they were talking about Samhain and not some weird made-up holiday or some holiday from a completely different culture, because that was just the worst mispronunciation of an Irish word I have ever heard in my life. That's my PSA. It's Samhain, not Samhain, and it is an Irish word. So, I just wanted to say, Ihe Samhain Hallowed Eve in Isla, which is, happy Halloween to you all, people, in Irish. So, without further ado, let's get into the episode. So, yes, it is thought, or the commonly held belief or myth, is that the modern day celebration of Halloween is a Christianization of a Celtic festival known as Samhain. Samhain is the Irish version. There is also Scottish versions, Welsh versions. Pretty much anywhere where Celtic people lived, they had a version of this holiday. And they're thought to have all inspired the modern day holiday of Halloween. And this is where The complications with my research came in because I also believed this until I started researching it. And I realized that in academic circles, this is hotly debated as to whether it is a Christianization of this Celtic holiday, or if it's based off of another holiday, or if it's an amalgamation of different holidays from different religions or cultural groups or traditions, stuff like that. So, turns out, the link between Samhain and Halloween is not as sturdy as I first thought it would, and it made this episode a lot more difficult to research. There's a lack of historical evidence really connecting the two, and from what I understand, a lot of that is based off of the fact that a lot of what we know about Samhain is related to oral tradition, so it was passed down orally and wasn't written down until years later, until Ireland sort of became Christianized, and therefore it's difficult to determine what was pre-Christian tradition and what was maybe adapted or sort of inspired by others, or, like an amalgamation perhaps. So it's kind of difficult to tell, like, what's traditional versus what may have been added before it all started kind of getting written down in the records that we now do have. So I'll go into that a bit later as well. It seems that most of the modern traditions of Halloween seem to be more rooted in the Christian All Hallows and All Saints days, which I believe is like November 1st as well. And it's thought that modern day Halloween is sort of inspired by this or rooted in this, and then also influenced by different cultures and different traditions that have sort of come together to create not the holiday of Halloween that we have now, because that's a very Americanized version of Halloween, but sort of the idea of what we think the history of Halloween is possibly more rooted in All Hallows and All Saints Day, and then also influenced by sort of different cultures and traditions, and may not be as reliably rooted in Samhain as we seem to think it is. So that is to say that I'm going to go into a bit about what we do know about Samhain, and then you can kind of extrapolate from that if you think it is related to Halloween or not. I'm not going to try and draw really any conclusions here about that. I just thought I'd talk about Samhain because it is thought to be related to Halloween at the very least, or at the very least it took place around this time of year as well, so kind of makes sense to do an episode on it anyway. And like I said before, a lot of Celtic tradition is from oral lore and then later written in record by Christians, and so most of our knowledge is from these later Christian records of Celtic traditions, and then also we do have a bit of archaeology from the time as well. So there was a festival in the past, or a celebration held on Samhain, or to celebrate Samhain, and Samhain is thought to be the first day of winter and one of the 4 important days in the Celtic or Irish Celtic calendar. They called these like quarter days. So there were 4 days a year that were considered to be important because of, I think usually it's to do with like seasonal changes, harvest, animals being born, animals dying, stuff like that. A lot to do with like agriculturally, how your life was going. These 4 days were very important to do with that. And then Samhain was thought to be one of the more important ones because it represents the first day of winter. Samhain itself is not Halloween. It's not the 31st of October. It's actually the 1st of November. Modernly, it's the 1st of November. However, because we now work off of the Gregorian calendar, it's possible that the actual Samhain, like back in Celtic times, probably would have landed more around November 5th, 6th, or 7th on the modern calendar versus on the November 1st that we celebrate it now. So Samhain was thought to be the midpoint between summer and winter, kind of when summer ends and winter begins. And Ihe Samhain, which is the eve of November or the eve of the end of summer, is the night before the 31st of November. So the or say the 1st of November, so the 31st of October, which is now Halloween. Iha is Irish for night or eve, depending on the context of the sentence. And Samhain is thought to be rooted in the Old Irish to mean summer's end. So Iha Samhain meaning eve of the end of summer or night of the end of summer. But these days, Samhain in modern Irish means November. So it could also mean eve of November or night of November. So going into kind of the traditions and the myths and the lore and some of the archaeology surrounding Samhain, the festival of Samhain, I do want to say it's very difficult to research this. Like I said, a lot of it's based off of oral traditions. There is a little bit of archaeology that I've been able to root out to do with this, but it is difficult. You'll read two sources and they'll say completely conflicting things. You'll read some sources that are blatantly wrong because they're referencing information that we've known has been wrong for centuries, but they're referencing it as if it's right. So it's very difficult to figure out what's right and what's wrong, especially because this is about a holiday, or it's about how people think a holiday got started, so things have gotten twisted and changed over the years, and it's kind of difficult to fish out what's right, what's wrong, what's a genuine possibility, and what's been discounted years ago but is still for some reason held on to as a possibility. So, yeah. Just take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt, essentially. Like always, there is a reference list in the description if you want to do your own research. I always encourage people to do their own research, but that's just some of the things I used. There's books in there. I didn't read the whole of the books. I just read the bits I could get for free off of Google Books. Thank you, Google Books, for free access to some chapters of the books below. But yeah, just take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. I tried to just take the bits of information that I could confirm across references and discount any bits of information that only appeared in one source because I figured they're less reliable, or discount information that was coming from sources that were also referencing things that aren't accurate as though they were accurate. I'll get a bit into that later. But yeah, so I hope that's not confusing. I'm sorry. This was very confusing to research. So it's thought that Samhain was celebrated in Ireland as early as 500 BC, and it is connected to kind of death and harvest and rebirth and kind of all of that stuff. So it is traditionally a holiday about death, which I guess is where the connection to Halloween comes in as well. So it was said that because Samhain was the night before the first day of winter, that it meant that the veil between the physical and metaphysical worlds were weaker, and it allowed spirits and fairies to sort of pass through from the other world into our world, or from our world into the other world. So this is thought to derive from the fact that the natural world appeared to be dying around people. You know, trees, grass, flowers, you know, like everything sort of goes dormant as it falls into winter, but people would have, it looks like everything's dying. So that's kind of where it's thought that Samhain is kind of associated with death, is because it seemed as though the world around them was dying and that the nights were getting longer, the sun was sort of disappearing, or the days were getting shorter. So that's why it's thought that people were associating this time of year with sort of a deeper connection to the dead and to spirits and to fairies and stuff like that. Also, at this time of year would have been when the harvest season was finished, when everything would have come in and when people would have started preserving food for the winter, when they would have started taking animals down from the summer pasture and killing the older animals and keeping the younger animals for the next year. This is the time of year where sort of all of the food is being brought in and preserved and prepared to hold people over for winter. This would be the time of year where people sort of have to start looking at their supply of food and figuring out how much they had, if it would kind of carry them through until the end of winter, if they'd produced enough to help them survive the period where they wouldn't have any new food sources coming in. So it's probably also why the festival's associated with death, because it's like this is the time of year where you start to realize or foresee how your winter is going to go based off of how much you've managed to accumulate in the year before this. It's also the time of year that animals begin to hibernate and also sort of disappear from the landscape. And then also, like I said, the sun sort of starts to disappear. The days become shorter, the nights become longer and darker as well. So it was thought that the worlds of the living and the dead were closer at this time of year than they were at any other time of year. And that this was the time of year that all of the spirits who died since the previous Samhain began to pass over into the next life. So I guess the belief was that all of the spirits only kind of pass over on Samhain each year, and that meant that there were more of them kind of walking about the world, I guess. So apparently people used to wear masks to hide themselves from dangerous spirits or fairies who might try and trick them in some way. So people were also taught to not walk alone on Samhain and not to go near any cemeteries or fairy mounds or forts, as this was believed to be places where spirits and fairies and such would be more likely to gather, and therefore you'd be more likely to interact with them. So they did not want you to be doing that. It said that because the veil between the living and the dead, or this world and the other world, was thin at this time of year, that people could be tricked into passing through the veil by bad ghosts or fairies or puka, as we call them in Irish, which is kind of, I always thought puka meant more just like ghost, but I think it is more associated with like these kind of bad ghosts or kind of malevolent spirits, I guess you'd call them. It's possible that this thought of people being tricked into passing through the veil may be associated with the increase in deaths of the old and the ill. So it is possible that coming into winter, elderly individuals or chronically ill individuals were more likely to die falling into harsh winters, and that this story of being tricked by the fairies into passing through the veil is a way of explaining why deaths in these groups seem to peak at this time of year. Perhaps possibility. It was also said that lanterns or candles would be lit and placed in the windows or on the doors of houses to guide the souls of ancestors home, or the souls of the good spirits, I suppose, back into the house to visit on Samhain. People were said to have left their door slightly ajar to allow the spirits to come in. It said as well that this was a good time for divination, especially surrounding marriage. There's a lot of kind of traditions, even now still, that we hold to do with Samhain or Halloween that are tied into sort of predictions for the future, especially around marriage. I'll go into that a bit later as well. So that's sort of the spiritual, otherworldly sort of death, spirit, ghost, fairy connection that we have to Samhain. But it was also thought that Samhain was an important time of the year for administrative works, because groups of individuals would be coming together to celebrate Samhain. And it said that there were gatherings in places like the Hill of Tara and the Hill of Ward. It said that during these gatherings, they would pick new kings, people would pay off their debts, they would hold trials, especially for particularly large crimes. I think it was bigger crimes, not like petty crimes that they were holding trials for. So this seems to be sort of all tied in with the idea that if you're holding these festivals to celebrate Samhain at the Hill of Tara or the Hallowed Ward or like other areas in Ireland, it makes sense that when you've got all these people gathered together, that it would be a good time of year to also figure out some of the administrative things that are going on as well. I would think as well, just when I was reading through this and it was talking about, oh, they are paying their debts as well, I had to wonder if maybe it had something to do with your winter, like your harvest coming in for the year. So your net worth, I guess, would be better understood, and therefore, like, that's why that was the time of year they were paying off debts or something. I didn't read anything about that. That's just what dawned on me when I read that like maybe that's why they're doing it at this time of year or not. So there's also stories about bonfires being built on the Hill of Tara, the Hallowed Ward, Newgrange, like different areas across Ireland where these gatherings would have taken place. They were building bonfires allegedly and sacrificing animals in them as well. This was thought to be done to sort of bring good fortune for the next year's harvest, bring good fortune for spring, bring good fortune for winter as well, to ensure like that they had enough food to kind of like pray, I guess, or hope that they would have enough food to carry them through to the winter, and that the spring would be good and the harvest for the next year would be good as well. It is said that there may have also been human sacrifices made, but this may be a sort of later addition to the story to kind of tie in with all the ghostly supernatural stuff to make it even spookier, to be like, oh, they were making human sacrifices as well. It is also possible that this human sacrifice story actually ties into them holding trials during these festivals, and that if individuals put on trial were sentenced to death, then that may, at a later date, in a later retelling, be changed to they were sacrificing people at these festivals, if that makes sense. So, yeah, it might not be that they were making human sacrifices. It might just be that people were being executed at the same time because they also happened to be holding these trials during this time because the whole community was together for this festival. So that's one of the things that people mention that might be true, but might have a different kind of truth behind it, if that makes sense. So one of the kind of big places tied to the Festival of Samhain is particularly the Hallowed Ward, which was known at that point, or would have been known at that point as, I'm going to butcher this, Tlachta? Oh, good God. I spoke fluent Irish for the first 18 years of my life, despite my dyslexia, but my reading ability in Irish is not great. It's Tlachttga. To my Irish audience out there, how do you pronounce that? Because Google Translate refuses to pronounce words in Irish. So I tried, I don't know. But that was what the Hallowed Ward was originally known as. And it was named after I believe like a deity or something that was said to have given birth to her 3 sons at the Hallowed Ward. So it was named after her, I guess. I don't really know. Anyway, it's said that all across the country on Ihe Samhain, the fires in people's homes, in businesses, basically any fire across the country was extinguished, and that the flame was taken from the bonfire on the Hallowed Ward, was walked to the Hill of Tara to light a bonfire there, and then people would take the fire from the Hill of Tara to 7 nearby hills to kind of light up the countryside, and then allegedly these flames sort of lit up the rest of Ireland, and it was a sort of way of, I guess, bidding farewell to the previous year and looking for good fortune for the next year. which I suppose makes sense if you're taking the flame, or the original flame is coming from a bonfire where you're making sacrifices for good fortune for the next year, that you then want to take the flame from that sacrificial fire and disperse it across the country to disperse the good fortune that was achieved in this fire. Does that make sense? I think that makes sense. So there have been excavations taking place at the Hill of Ward. The last ones I read were to do with 2014. I don't know if there's been more recent works done, but that's the only information I could find relating to excavations at the Hill of Tara, and the possible connection to Samhain was from back in 2014. So again, grain of salt. So there was evidence found of intensive burning at the site. So this could suggest that the Samhain tradition of lighting a bonfire there every year and making sacrifices was taking place, because they are seeing evidence of intensive burning. But it could also be associated with metalworking, pottery, or glass manufacturing, which there is also evidence of at the site. So there's multiple different reasons or means by which this intensive burning could take place, and there's kind of evidence for all of it at the site, so it's difficult to say if it's associated purely with this one festival, or if it's associated with multiple different things, if it's not associated with the festival at all, or if perhaps it's associated with the festival and a bunch of other things. There is some possible evidence of ritual activity taking place at the site as well. So they are seeing large quantities of animal bone at the site, which could be suggestive of large-scale feasting. And they're seeing this evidence across all three phases of the site, showing that potentially large-scale feasting was going on at the site over long periods of time. So that could be associated with this festival taking place. There would have been a lot of eating and drinking going on during the Samhain festival, and then all of this animal bone is getting dumped at the site as well because of this. So it is a possible connection to that. There are also myriad of other reasons why animal bone in large quantities could end up at the site. Could just be that there were loads of different smaller events going on at the site, and that's why you get loads of animal bone, as opposed to just one big annual event going on. So there's different reasons why it could be there, but it is some evidence of some kind of ritual activity going on at the site as well. In the vein of the human sacrifice myth, there were some human remains found at the Hill of Ward. Most of them seem to date to the Bronze Age. However, there is one infant thought to be between 7 and 10 months old, who dates to 450 AD, but this is around the time of Christianity in Ireland, so it's difficult to say whether any of these are connected to this human sacrifice thing that's going on, or the trials that are going on at the site. It's possible, or more likely, I would think, that these individuals are important individuals, or in the case of the infant, the child of an important individual, and that's why they were buried there, and it's got nothing to do with the festivals or any kind of ritual activity that was potentially going on at the site. So it's probably not related to Samhain at all, but I did think I would mention that there were human remains found there. So as of 2014, there was no passage tombs found at the Hill of Ward, but it is possible or probable that there was one at some point, and it just might not survive, or they just haven't found it yet. A lot of passage tombs are sort of connected to the sun, to the summer solstice, the winter solstice, to the equinox, stuff like that. So they would have built the passage tombs to kind of be in line with the sun at certain times of year. And if there is a passage tomb at the Hill of Ward, which it seems like there should have been, it's possible that it's just no longer there, that it doesn't exist anymore for some reason. But it's possible if there is one, or if there was one, that it would have aligned with the autumn solstice, so that if there was one, that when the sun rose, at the autumn solstice, it would have lit up the passage too. So if you think about Newgrange, that one lights up, so they're saying that it's possible if there was one on the Hill of Words, they would expect that it was solar aligned to the autumn solstice. So Ireland by no means is the only place in the world, or the Celts are not the only people in history to have celebrated the kind of end of summer and the beginning of winter. There are many cultures, many countries that have traditions around celebrating this time of year, because for many individuals, for many cultures in many countries, this also would have been the end of the harvest season and the beginning of the harsher winter season. And so there are a lot of traditions and a lot of myths that surround this. Just off the top of my head, the first one that came to me was the myth of Persephone and Hades, that Persephone is the goddess of spring, and that her descent into the underworld to be with her husband Hades for 6 months of the year sort of marks the end of summer and the beginning of winter. So there is this tradition around a lot of different cultures in a lot of different countries. So it's by no means tied specifically to Ireland or to Samhain. And I think that's why it makes it more difficult to kind of tie Samhain to modern Halloween, because there's probably this connection to harvest and to death and to winter and to renewal and like all of that among many different cultures, and therefore it's harder to kind of tie it down to one. It might seem like it all sort of aligns with Samhain, but I'm sure if you look in depth into other cultures as well, you could see sort of similar themes appearing in other cultures as well. So like I said, there's a bit of complication and confusion when it comes to Samhain, even just itself, not talking about its connection to Halloween, but even just Samhain itself and what took place in Samhain and what it was and why it was. And one example of this is in 1762, there was a British military engineer named Charles Valency. And he came to Ireland to work, but he was really interested in Irish folklore and Irish language, and sort of wrote a lot of books to do with Irish folklore and language based off of his own research and interaction with people. But a lot of these books were really inaccurate. And the sort of main one that gets brought up when talking about Samhain is that he named Samhain as a Celtic god of the dead. It isn't. It's the holiday. It's the festival. It's not a god. It's not a deity of any kind. It is a festival, not a person. And yet, despite this being known as incorrect information pretty much since it was published, because people in Ireland knew that that wasn't true, and other people who'd researched Irish folklore knew that that wasn't true at the time when it came out, it was still incorrectly cited as fact up until the 1990s. So for hundreds of years, this information has been recorded again and again as being fact, even though it was disproven as soon as it was written, essentially. So that's what I mean when I say it's difficult to research Samhain, because even the information that we do have sometimes can be wrong or misinterpreted and has just been recycled so many times that it's become cemented in the history of Samhain, even though it's not true and it was never thought to be true. So it's just kind of an example of why researching this whole episode ended up being a lot harder than I thought it would be. So that is kind of the old Irish Celtic version of Samhain. And I thought it would be interesting to kind of go into a bit more of the modern times of Samhain, or of Halloween, I guess, the post-Christianization of Ireland. So it's possible that some of the things I'm talking about next were also tied to Samhain, but I'm not seeing any records of when these traditions took place, and a lot of them seem to be more modern to me. I could be wrong. They could be tied back all the way to the old Celtic 500 BC version of Samhain, but I'm not seeing records of them as much when people are talking about the old traditional Celtic Samhain. It's more like when people are talking about Samhain in general across the whole span of time that they mention this stuff. So it could be connected to the very old, or it could be slightly more modern. I don't know, but I thought I'd give it its own little separate section and say, I don't know when this started. It could be from the beginning. It could have started much later. I don't know. So there's traditions of people, not just children, but adult men, and I think adult women as well, but possibly less often. Definitely children doing it too, of them going house to house, and they sort of, it's not like trick-or-treating. It was kind of more, they would recite a poem or recite a rhyme or sort of provide entertainment in some kind of way, and in exchange they would receive apples, different kinds of fruits, nuts, or money in return for their sort of treat of their entertainment. These people would have been wearing disguises, but not costumes per se. They weren't dressing up like someone. They were just wearing disguises to hide their identities. They weren't intending to look like anything in particular like you would think of when you think of trick-or-treating now. It was more just to disguise their identities. This, again, could tie back into the old idea of wearing masks and disguising your identity to kind of keep bad spirits from taking you away. It was also common for pranks to be pulled at this time of year, especially if people didn't receive treats in exchange for their entertainment at the door. I saw one account that was saying the traditional prank was to throw cabbage at someone's door, which also is what leads me to believe that this is maybe a later addition to the story of Samhain, because why are you wasting food when winter's about to set in, throwing it at someone's door? But that's just a thought that crossed my mind when I was reading this. I didn't see that written down anywhere. So apparently this sort of tradition of going door to door and providing entertainment in exchange for some kind of fruit or nut or money, possibly, it wasn't always tied specifically to Ihe Samhain. It was more tied to the month, especially more in recent times. So I've seen records of this sort of stuff taking place up until the 1990s in Northern Ireland. Now, it might still take place in Northern Ireland. It might take place in Ireland as well, possibly in more rural areas up until modern times. But the records I saw talking about this were only up until the 1990s. So I can only say for certainty that it was taking place in Northern Ireland up until the 1990s, but it's possible it still takes place all over Ireland. I just couldn't find any records about that, and I don't have any anecdotal evidence of that. So fireworks and bonfires are also a big part of this celebration. Now, bonfires seem to be very traditionally associated with Samhain. Like I said, they seem to light bonfires at the Hill of Ward and the Hill of Tara all the way back into Celtic tradition. And then obviously the fireworks are a more modern addition to the celebration to light fireworks. Again, not only on Ihe Samhain, but also the whole month leading up to it. There are fireworks constantly going off outside. I was at work the other week. There were fireworks going off. It was the middle of the day. I don't understand why people waste fireworks in the middle of the day. Anyway, so it's also said that the tradition of carving a jack-o'-lantern out of a pumpkin might derive from this idea of carving turnips into lanterns. Again, I don't know when this started. It is a thing. It did happen. I just don't know when it started. I don't know if it's from Celtic version of Samhain, if it's from a post-Christian version of Samhain. I don't know when it originates, but it is a thing. People would carve turnips into lanterns, put lights in them. It's possible they also would have put them in the windowsills or on the door stoops. Like I said, they used to light candles to sort of attract the ancestral spirits back to the home, or like guide them back to the home. So it's possible that they maybe use these turnip lanterns for the same reason. They're super creepy looking. So if I was an ancestral ghost, I wouldn't be tied back to my house by a creepy turnip lantern. I would think someone was cursing me. But that's just me. I'm not a spirit yet. So who knows? Maybe I would find it appeasing as a spirit. I don't know, man, they're really, really creepy looking. So some of the other sort of traditions that are tied to Samhain, but again, I don't know when they begin, is barnbrack, which is a type of yeast bread that has sultanas and sort of preserved fruit in it as well. That's eaten around Halloween or around Samhain. This one is still done up until today. We had a barnbrack downstairs in the kitchen up until like last week. Someone ate it. I don't like it, which is funny because I like barnbrack when my mom makes it. I don't like the one from the shop. It's not good. I don't know what they put in it, but it's not good. My mom's one is good. But so what they would have done and what they still do is they take a little ring and they hide it in the middle of the barnbrack, and it was said that whoever got the slice with the ring in it would have good fortune for the whole year, and that they would apparently get married before the next Samhain. I've gotten the ring a few times. I have yet to marry, so don't know what that's about. But also, apparently, traditionally, they could put coins, rags, thimbles, and buttons into the barnbrack as well. And these were supposed to symbolize different sort of divinations or outcomes for the year ahead. So coins would divinate good fortune for the person who found them. Rags would be bad fortune. Thimbles were said to be for... If a woman got a thimble, it was said that she would end up a spinstress. If a man got a button, it was said that he'd end up a bachelor. So a lot of them are sort of tied to marriage as well. It seems that a lot of the divination practices that were going on in Samhain seem to be tied to marriage for some reason, which is interesting. I don't know if it's got something to do with the time of year or what, but it seems that whenever they mention divination, it's more specifically marriage rather than like your fortune or your health or anything like that. So I just thought that was interesting to mention. Some of the other divination sort of things they used to use were like bobbing for apples and apple on a string, which are things we also still do, but they're not really tied to divination. I didn't know that they were. I also couldn't find out what they mean, so I don't really know what that one's about. But we do still bob for apples and try and get apples on a string. It's bobbing for apples is now that I think about it, a very weird game to have children play, because it's essentially just drowning yourself until you get an apple. It's incredibly difficult to do. There's a trick to it. I feel like once you figure out the trick, you're good. But before that, you are essentially just drowning yourself for an apple. It's kind of not worth it. But yeah, all in all, Samhain is thought to be this sort of communal gathering event to celebrate the end of the harvest, to make sacrifice in the hopes of a good winter and a good harvest for the next year. It's a connection to your current community and to your ancestors. It's a time when the veil between the living and the dead is thinner, and there's a lot of superstition going on around that. So that seems to be like the traditional Celtic version of Samhain, and obviously over the many years, it's changed and evolved with influence from other countries, other traditions, just as Ireland itself changes, the celebration changes. So a lot of these things I'm talking about, they might still take place in Ireland, especially more rural Ireland, but the area of Ireland that I'm from is very urbanized, and our version of Halloween is the much more Americanized version of Halloween. We dress up like our favorite Marvel superheroes, and we go knocking on doors, and we say trick or treat, and people give us candy, and we do not have concern that our candy is poisoned or that there's razor blades in our apples. I don't know what's going on in America, y'all. Also, there's no hard fact that ever happened. Actually, that's not true. It happened once, but it was intentional, and the guy was trying to kill his own kids. There's a lot of true crime podcasts about it, so you should listen to those. But yeah, it's not a thing for anyone out there who thought it was a thing that people were poisoning the candy. It's not. It's never happened. But yeah, we are veering more towards that Americanized version of Halloween now in Ireland. But there is some of the traditional things that we still hold on to. Like I said, we still have Barn Brack. We still have bobbing for apples. We still have apples on a string. When I was a child, I used to go to one of my friend's houses for Halloween because she lived in a housing estate. So there were more houses to go to. There's not a lot of houses on my road. So we used to go up to her Nana's house and go trick-or-treating around there. And because they were in a housing estate, they used to have bonfires there as well. And then they kind of had like this open door thing where like her entire family, like aunts, uncles, cousins, would all be over in her Nana's house. And the door would kind of be open and the neighbors would be coming and going. And her Nana used to sneak out at one point with some of the aunts and some of the neighbors, and they'd dress up and then like break into the house to scare the kids. So that was a much more like communal, maybe old Irish version of Halloween. And I hold on to those memories very dearly because when I think back on Halloween and why I love Halloween, I always think back of those Halloweens at my friend's Nana's house because they were just so much fun. And you still got all the sweets from going around house to house and trick-or-treating, and you still died of a sugar rush the next day, but it was just that kind of community spirit, I feel like, that I don't see anymore. Again, I live on a road with very few houses, so maybe that's why I'm not seeing it. I also live in a very urban area, so maybe that's why I'm not seeing it. But I'm just, yeah, I cling on to those happy memories of communal Halloweens. But it does appear to me, from my viewpoint, that it's becoming a much more Americanized holiday here in Ireland. And I'm kind of sad about that because I feel like we're losing our connection to this kind of community event that it used to be. I say this, and yet I don't really celebrate Halloween anymore because there are no kids in my family, and like I said, my road is very small. There's very few houses, so we don't really have a lot of kids that come around either. Maybe 2 or 3 on Halloween evening. I feel like I'm in that weird middle ground where I'm not around any kids. I'm not a kid anymore and I'm not around any kids, so I'm not really experiencing Halloween the same as I used to. But yeah, I still love the idea of Halloween and kind of all the spookiness and all of that. I still really enjoy it. It's still one of my favorite holidays. It's just, I'm in that weird middle ground where I am around no children, and therefore Halloween is different to me. But yes, that is this week's episode on Samhain. I'd be very interested to see what you guys have to say. Do you think that Samhain is a Christianization, or Halloween is a Christianization of Samhain? Do you think they're the same holiday? Do you think that Halloween's possibly somewhat inspired by Samhain, but then also inspired by different holidays and different traditions as well, that it's an amalgamation of many different things? Or do you think it's like based in Samhain with like a little bit taken from other things as well? I'd be interested to see what you guys have to think. I'd also be really interested to hear about other people's traditions, people from different countries or different cultures. Like, do you guys have a sort of harvest festival event, holiday that takes place in your country or in your culture that's kind of similar to this? Like, I know a lot of places have harvest ones. I'm interested to see if they're also connected to death and the supernatural in the same way that Samhain is. So that'd be really interesting to hear if anyone has those. So thank you all for listening to this week's episode and for tuning in to the podcast as a whole over these last 10 episodes this season. I've been reading the comments on YouTube, and we actually got a review on Apple Podcasts last week, and they mean so much to me, guys. Really, they do. I will be releasing a special Q&A episode, which I'm actually going to record tonight, that is coming out on Halloween, and I do want to read out some of the really nice comments and that review when that episode comes out. So if you guys have left a few comments, tune into that because I might be reading them out during that episode. So yeah, I just wanted to thank you guys so much. You've been really supportive. And for anyone out there who has complained about my mic quality, I know, I'm sorry. I try every single episode. I'm trying something new to make the setup I have work. I am going to buy a new mic, but by the time I realized how bad the problems were with my mic and that I couldn't fix them, it was a little late to be buying a new mic for this season. So I will be investing in a new microphone for the next season. I'm sorry for the microphone problems. But I have to say, everyone who complained about the mic problems was very respectful about it. So thank you very much for that. I also hear it. It is a problem. Anyway, thank you all so much for tuning in to the Resurrectionist podcast. It really means a lot. I will see you, or you will hear me, in the Q&A episode. And then after that, I'm hoping to release some shorts and maybe some edited down versions of the episodes, but it'll be a little more sporadic until season 2 comes out. I'm not sure when season 2 will be coming out. It'll be definitely a few months at the very least. But you can follow me on Instagram at The Resurrection Woman for updates about all of that. I'll be posting it over there. So thank you all so much for listening and for all your support this season. It's really meant a lot. And I hope to be seeing, or you to be hearing, me in season 2 coming soon. Thank you all. Goodbye.